You had to realize the fact that you were dead. You had to know that you were a dead man to really do what you were supposed to be doing. And that's why it was so hard to come back from it, because it was like coming back from the dead.
I was 11 when my brother Win returned from Vietnam in 1968. My other two older brothers had also already left home. This is the story of where they were in the years surrounding his return, what they were doing, and lessons learned.
I had a good dream for my life, and I really screwed it up when I left the University of Idaho, because I should have stayed there. I know, because I loved it there, and I don't even know why I left. Well, you just basically waited to get the letter in the mail, and when it came, it made you very unhappy. That was the way it was.
So the next morning, after partying all night, and we staggered onto the bus in the morning, walked to the bus, rode to Milwaukee, and on the way, we got everybody singing Alice's Restaurant, and of course, the sergeant on the bus, who was our escort, was glaring at us all the way. And so anyway, we got to the terminal and, went through their procedures, and, they took my blood pressure, and I asked the guy what it was, and he told me, and it was just way off the charts. And he said, I said, actually, that isn't right, is it? And he says, no, but you passed. And he says, oh, you have a pin in your shoulder. And I said, yeah, here's the x-rays and everything. And he says, well, it shouldn't bother you. Pass. And they passed everybody on that bus, no matter what condition they were in. We went back on the bus. It was pretty gloomy. Nobody was singing. They picked all the lotto numbers, and thing came up as 266, and I think they ended up going to like 264 or something finally, but it got me out. I wasn't inducted.
I came in with a handful of leaflets, and immediately as soon as I came in, somebody came roaring up to me, and he said, you have to take those leaflets outside. And I said to him, no, I don't want to do that. And he said, okay, well, come over here then. And so I took the leaflets in my hand, and he said, well, put them in your back pocket. And I said, no, I don't want to do that. And so he was prepared for a big struggle, but I wasn't going to struggle. I was going to make sure that I had showed up, and they had me on record as showing up for the draft, for the induction. But I was already prepared in my mind not to take the step forward. And so eventually, inside the draft board office, they took me into the back, and they said, well, you have three choices. You can put the leaflets in your back pocket so they can't be seen, or you can give them to me and I'll tear them up and put them in the wastebasket, or you can take them back outside. I said, no, I don't like any of those three choices. He said, well, you know what that means, don't you? And no, I said, well, you'll have to show me. And then he said, well, go upstairs and get his records. And so they came down with the big manila folder that had a congressional investigation in orange letters on the front. And so they looked at all my scores, and they said, oh, you're one of those smart-ass guys, right? And I said, well, probably. And then they said, well, you know what that means, don't you? And I said, no, you have to show me. So he said, he beckoned to another guy, and the two of them just kind of, one on each shoulder, just kind of frog-hopped me across the room to the side of the building. And so they opened the door, and I just walked out the door and just walked away. So I was extremely lucky.
First, I was, very patriotic and for it. And then Win went to Vietnam and said, well, whatever you do, don't go into the Army. Go to Canada if you have to. And so, at that point, I became anti-war. It split our family.
This kid on one of the armored personnel carriers that was about probably 5 feet away from us just sat down and put his rifle underneath his chin and shot himself. And a bullet went right through his head and missed my head by about 2 inches. It went right past my left ear. And I jumped down off the tank, and I had my pistol out of the holster. And was kind of ready to shoot him. I was that mad. And then I just looked at his face, and his friends were holding him up. And he had a bullet hole coming out the side of his head. And the light was just going out of his eyes. And I just turned around and went back the way I came, and it just made me feel just awful. Made me feel bad because I was mad at him in the first place, and made me feel bad that the whole thing happened.
President Johnson was in Century City Hotel, so I went there to that big rally, and there was a huge number of people, and there were motorcycle cops in front leaning against their motorcycles, and a brick came down on his head. He actually had his helmet off, you know? And from that point on, they were angry. So the motorcycle cops started pushing us back, you know, and of course we were yelling and screaming. But there was this guy, I'll never forget, there was this guy in front of me, and he was in a wheelchair, and he was, you know, he couldn't get up, he couldn't move out of his wheelchair, and his attendant got lost in the crowd, I think. And so he was trying to get out of the way with his wheelchair, moving himself, and he couldn't get out of the way, and everybody was pushing. And there was this big cop, you know, one of the motorcycle cops with his truncheon, and he was rushing past me, and he kept yelling, "Move, move, get out of here, move, move, move." And he had this big, like, long truncheon about this high and down to the other hand. He was using two hands to smash this guy on the back of his head and neck, on his back and his head too. And there was more blood coming out of his head and running down on the back of his seersucker suit.
I remember being in a protest that ended up, you know, semi-violent, and 20 or 30,000 people in the demonstration. Turned a corner and there was a line of National Guardsmen about 12 deep, you know, with bayonets fixed. Fortunately, they didn't have any bullets in their gun. They weren't issued any ammunition. And a week later, ran into a friend of mine in the bar who was in the National Guard. And I asked him how he felt about the whole thing, and he said, "You know, you guys scared the shit out of me. If I had bullets in my gun, I would have shot you all down."
We learned that the experts that we depended on actually didn't know what was going on, and they certainly didn't have the answers. So it was a good thing we did question them, and we should still be doing that, because it comes down to the fact that people on the ground have to make the changes and not the experts, because the experts have another agenda that they wanted to do. Now I would consider myself a radical leftist, but you know, I'm not for going out and shooting at people or, you know, blowing up things or anything like that, because that's killing people in the wrong way. People have to change their heads, not the number of arms on their body.
Is I tend to vote for someone, and I do vote whenever I can, but I vote for whoever I think might have a slight amount of common sense and actually know what they're doing. Rather, like, I think a person that runs for president should have possibly a master's degree in economics or something, rather than a master's degree in bullshit, or if you know what I mean. That's running the United States is not the equivalent of running a circus.
Authority for authority's sake is pretty stupid. You know, all the constitutional protections that have been thrown aside in the 8 years of the Bush administration is sickening.
The most important thing for any person to always remember, any human being to always remember, is what makes you human in almost any situation as compared to an animal or something. What makes you human is your ability to use your mind. Even in a war, you have to be able to use your head. You have to keep thinking all the time, even when you're scared and even when you're angry or happy or whatever, you still have to keep on thinking. Don't ever stop thinking. Don't ever stop using your head.